So here we are. You know what I really like about this film now that I oversee it is that, yes, there are a lot of issues, but everyone seems to still believe in the city's resilience and our ability to overcome the challenges facing us. And I'm glad to see that because, of course, also with the pandemic, um, in general, the public mood is so uh, down and disappointed and sad. And I'm glad to see that there are some. I'm glad to see this optimism and this faith in Amsterdam's ability to pull itself up by the bootstraps and overwin these challenges. How does it strike you, Michiel, now that you've seen it again?
Yeah, it brings back fond feelings, fond memories of the time we spent on this boat. I wish we could do it more often, but unfortunately, we don't have that much sun in this city. But maybe people have seen enough of us for now. Maybe it's nice also to go to some of our guests, especially Gina and Andrea, who've been watching this film for the first time and who are not in the film or not part of the film. But you both visited Amsterdam. We showed you around. I think you got a quite good in-depth understanding of the city. Does it live up to your expectations? Is this the kind of city that both of you have visited, or is this a different version of it? Maybe Gina, we can start with you because you were here 2 years ago, I believe, on probably the sunniest day of the century. So you were really lucky.
Yes, thank you, Nikhil. Fond memories from late summer of 2019. I think you all were having one of the hottest summers on record at the time. And, there was a lot of swimming going on in the canals, which I found fascinating given how much sort of commercial traffic was in the canals at the same time. But I think you just barely scratched the surface. I was there with you for about 2 weeks. You really sort of gave me the Anthony Bourdain treatment, helping me understand sort of the inner workings of the city, things that most tourists probably weren't exposed to, things like that. So, yeah, I mean, it does, but it's like I said, it's just so much more to Amsterdam. As a woman from the United States, Commonwealth of Kentucky, Louisville, Kentucky, which is the largest city in the Commonwealth. Oftentimes I felt like I was in more of an American environment in Amsterdam than I was in America, in the United States. Everybody seems to be bilingual. Welcome. Amsterdam really seemed to embrace me. I never felt othered or out of place wherever I roamed. So yeah, I think it's a great depiction. We also got a chance to do a tour by boat while we were there. I was terrified, but we made it just fine. But you're right, the vantage point, the perspectives from the canal versus traveling around as a pedestrian. I myself do not know how to ride a bicycle. So the multimodal interconnectedness of everything from the subways to the trains on the street and all of that, the bike paths everywhere. It was a huge culture shock for me, for someone who does geek out on infrastructure. It's like no other experience I've ever had anywhere. And so I think at the time, too, I was there were several large developments either nearing completion or kicking off. You all are developing housing at something like 1,000 units per project, which in the American context, particularly for the housers that are tuning in today, is unfathomable. And to know that you do a lot of that development on land that you've made, that also was just one of the most mind-boggling things to me. We talk about sea level rise, but the Dutch, you all have essentially mastered and tamed the sea by creating land to build on to meet your housing needs. So all of those things, in a lot of ways, the United States talks a great game about these things, like going off natural gas, for example. I think you all are up against that deadline as well. You're going to decommission all the gas engines and things like that. You've got electric cars on the street, offering free parking and electricity for electric cars. I mean, like, all of that is just so consistent where you say you want to go. I really admire that about the city and the country, especially, like, say, given my context here in the United States.
I'm happy to hear you still look back so positively and yeah, that you can sum up all these great aspects of the city so nicely. I'm also curious to hear more like critical viewpoints you might have, but maybe it's nice also to hear from Andrea, who came here just 2 months ago, I believe, when it was less sunny. So you saw a more realistic version of the city, I guess. But what did you take away? It wasn't the first time you were here, but what struck you?
Yeah, no, well, I was there 30 years ago, so it was interesting to see how much has changed in 30 years, but also how much hasn't changed. Like Vancouver, if you came to Vancouver 30 years ago and came back, you wouldn't recognize large parts of the city anymore. And of course, Amsterdam doesn't have that same quality to it. So it was interesting. I feel like Chris, in your interview in the movie, I think you created this juxtaposition between Vancouver and Amsterdam, which is a fair one, but I think there's also probably more in common than there is not, at least on the surface of it. So it's hard not to compare it, like Amsterdam and Vancouver, particularly as a former city councillor, we were often compared to Amsterdam and sort of expectations around if Amsterdam's doing it, well, why can't we? So it was hard not to travel through Amsterdam with that eye to it. You know, you were asking about whether the video captured Amsterdam, and it struck me as I was watching it that it sort of caught the skin and bones of it, but this idea of the guts and feathers, like the lived experience of people on sort of a tangible, tacky level, like the stickiness of it, is so hard to capture in video. I thought the commentary you and Tracy gave was good, but like the places, I mean, notwithstanding, I was there right before the lockdown, so COVID made it hard to get into a lot of places, but just the connections and how people relate within the spaces you're showing us are the part that's hard to communicate, even when we're there in person. So I think the things that are very similar, I mean, we both have a colonial past that we're reckoning with, Amsterdam and Vancouver. We both have, it's not necessarily the city, but the countries we're in are small countries bordering these massive superpowers, and that has pressure on us, right? Like it's a constant pressure on us. And at the same time, while we may love to hate the US and Germany respectively, we also are very economically interdependent on each other. Vancouver is the largest port in Canada by a factor of 5-fold. Like the next 5 ports combined are not as big as Vancouver. And the only one in North America that's bigger is in Los Angeles. So a lot of our traffic is actually US traffic that's moving back and forth. We have a lot of rain here, so we also have that. In fact, it rains more days in Vancouver than it does in Amsterdam. It rained most of the time I was there, so, but they kept apologizing for it, and I was like, it's kind of like home. And I think critically, we're both edge cities. Like we both are the sort of membrane through which many things have to pass. So sort of from, you know, Europe to the Americas, you've got that, whereas we have Asia on one side, and then we're right on the border with the US, so we become that membrane. What was interesting to me, and Michiel, you and I talked about this a lot, so we both sort of become these laboratories, right, where all these things are meeting and crashing together. Amsterdam, like the way you deal with your laboratory is that you're constantly breaking rules, like so much so that it's not even obvious that you're breaking rules, because that's the normal rule, is to break a rule. Whereas in Vancouver, we're very fixated on how to make new rules, right? So we're not, it sounds, they can look the same on the surface, but they're actually quite different, right? We're trying to create a new normal, whereas your normal is abnormal, if that makes sense. But Renee, your points about the smooth city, I think it was referred to me when I was there as sort of this is what we feel like Vancouver is like, is the smooth city, like that this is an importation of Vancouver into Amsterdam. So I've thought about that a lot, and there's so much to unpack there, but I think ultimately what I would say is that we both are in circumstances where when people come and look at the city, what they see is the skin and bones. What they don't see under it is that a lot of people are living in poverty. And even those that aren't are sort of constantly treading water just to keep their, like, you know, it's not even their head, it's just like their mouth above water to try and get enough air to keep going a little longer to get to some firm ground. And that's very hard to capture, except in the collisions that we have when we meet each other.
Mm. Yeah, I agree with you. I think it's really tempting to get caught up in what Chris so interestingly pointed out as hashtag Dutch problems. So to stay on the surface and think of mobility as only an issue of dealing with like this enormous amount of bikes that we have to park somewhere. But I think underneath all of that, there are some major issues which we're also kind of looking away from. So when it comes to this growing inequality that Tracy pointed out, the fact that, for example, foreign investors, including BlackRock investment company, has been buying up social housing, not units, but entire neighborhoods. Like tens of thousands of houses have been sold to foreign investors in this city. And then thinking of this widening gap, not only in wealth, but also in income and opportunities that people have in the city. I think for a long time, we had this tradition that we would provide for these people. We would give them stability through social housing, for example, but that is rapidly declining and crumbling right in front of us. And instead, we're looking away, we're fixating on smaller issues. But maybe you, Renee, you want to step in as well, because this is something that you've been looking into, like shedding light on the overlooked problems of the city. Yeah, and you know, holding people accountable for that as well.
Yeah, definitely. And yeah, maybe like seeing the video now, I felt that I was rather kind in my description of the smooth city. But I think, yeah, I really liked also the way that Tracy framed it. You know, like there is this raging inequality. And I think the outcome of that, the fact that like there is this radical reorganization of how the city is organized and where different kinds of people get to live, that is like the smooth city is an outcome of that. So like there is like, yeah, more wealthy people have recolonized, we can say, I think, the inner city and its surrounding neighborhoods. And at the same time, a lot of people are being pushed out. So what you see, for example, is like rising numbers of homelessness. There is a lot of undocumented people in Amsterdam that have really nowhere to go. There's no housing. There are no opportunities for them to access any parts, any aspect of Dutch society. They're not allowed to work. They're not allowed to access normal housing. For example, my partner works in psychiatry, visits a lot of people's homes across the city, and yeah, see situations that people live with like 50 square meters with 2 parents and 5 or 6, sometimes even adult kids living like in tiny apartments. And that is also part of the city. Yeah, that is far away from the canals. I mean, you can bike there in like 30 minutes, but it's also part of the city, right? And yeah, that is also Amsterdam. And like, if these kids, they probably can't find a place to stay in the city. And if they want to, if they need a place for themselves, if they find a partner and want to live somewhere, they have to go outside of the city. So there's also, I think, a generation that has been growing up in Amsterdam over the last 2 decades that is now leaving the city because the inner city is only filled with the people who can afford it, and also expats who can afford it and have like, yeah, taken up properties across the city. And I mean, that's, yeah, I think we need to rethink how we distribute space in Amsterdam, and yeah, who gets to live where. And yeah, Tracy, also liked your perspective that there is a lot of that there's still reason for optimism, right? There is interesting pilots and interesting things going on. For example, with these new housing cooperatives, I think that's a very interesting way out that allow generations growing up in Amsterdam right now also with to secure spaces for themselves on the long term.
Mm-hmm. I was also wondering, like the cycling culture, which was celebrated by Chris in a way. is that kind of part of the same smooth city in a way? Because how I see it as well, that cycling has also become a lifestyle. Until recently, you would only ride like a 20-year-old bike that had no worth, and now there's this whole fetish around super fancy bikes, and then there's this whole drive of the city to kind of pedestrianize the inner city to make it more bike and pedestrian friendly. So it seems that even cycling, which for a long time was seen as the most democratic mode of transportation, is kind of sucked into this smoothness drive of the city in a way. Or maybe I'm exaggerating here.
It's also a lifestyle thing. Chris, can you perhaps also address the question that we see in the chat from Sarah Peskin? She asks, and I know you wrote about this, you and Melissa, in your last book, how were older people faring in this bicycle-oriented environment? Perhaps you can take that into your response as well.
Yeah, well, I think it's interesting because in the overall context of the Netherlands, the number of people over the age of 65 that continue cycling well into their 80s and 90s in a lot of cases is very prevalent, and in fact make up one of the largest groups of people that cycle on a regular basis. What's tricky is when you get to Amsterdam, you know, you talk about the cycling traffic in Amsterdam and how it is so intense, and it does become a little bit more of a conflict. And so you still see it, but not as prevalent as we do, say, here in Delft, where the population is smaller and the networks are a bit calmer. Which, you know, as Michiel, you were pointing out, there's still stresses there. There's still underlying challenges that need to be addressed, even though to North American eyes, it seems like, yes, they're Dutch problems, and wouldn't we just love to have cycle traffic in Vancouver or in Louisville or in other places? But it is something to address. You know, do we have to now think in Amsterdam about widening cycle tracks, about the pedestrianization and removing of cars to create more space for bicycles so that we can maintain in even the city of Amsterdam that ability to cycle into old age, because it's important not just for their physical health, but for also their social health, because they get to maintain participation in society, where in other cities they become, where they're more car dominated, they oftentimes become more isolated and taken out of society and leading to other problems, including anxiety, depression, you know, increased, just increased worry and stress in life. Yeah.
So in the book, we do tell the story of our neighbor, Peter, who was born on the street where he still lives in his 70s, having never owned a car. And the bicycle is his tool to continue his social activities, his shopping activities. And full disclosure, we don't live in Amsterdam. We live in Delft, to the southeast of Amsterdam. But to him, not having to own and operate a car is what keeps him being able to age in place. And this is something that other cities are striving for. But if they are completely car dependent, once you get that driver's license taken away, then you either become dependent on colleagues and relatives to drive you around the city, a bus that very rarely shows up, if at all, or you're trapped in your home and unable to do the things that you want to do. So I think it's much bigger than just transportation, as we really do try to stress.
I completely agree with you guys, but if I can also maybe provide some downside to it. What I think is interesting, what you see in Amsterdam, for example, there is like this, the municipality is now pushing fully to really get cars completely outside of the inner city, really focus on like large pavements, large bicycle tracks. You probably also researched this new program that is about like cars are guests. So streets are now fully for bikes and cars are guests on the bike lane, so to say. This is like this new model that I find very interesting. But what you also see, I think, is that Amsterdam inner city is now completely turning into this very soft and smooth environment where there's only like pedestrians and bikes. But what if, for example, you want to start a workshop and you want to have you want to make things in the city and you need things to be brought there, your materials, and you want then to bring your goods somewhere else. Or for example, if you want to start a small club, for example, and you need to bring your sound equipment and like the van with the band that's going to play also needs to come. I mean, it also turns the city into, it takes out a lot of life and opportunities out of the city at the same time, I think. So there's both sides to that also, I think.
Mm.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good point. I think it's why we really emphasize, at least in the second book, it's not necessarily about removing all cars, but it's about creating like a low car environment where cars that need to be in the space for exactly what you're talking about have that access, but it doesn't become the dominant access.
Yeah, for sure.
Maybe can I go back to Gina? Because I know how you feel about your car. I mean,
And how is that?
it's a crucial aspect of your life, right? When we were living in the Doble, you would refer to it as the living room. So you would go, you would have your meetings there. You know, it's really like coming from a European city to see you kind of being completely comfortable in your car seemed alien to me, but I really started to appreciate it during my time in Cambridge. But then you coming to Amsterdam, having no car, being dependent on, bicycles, which you don't ride. Like, how do you feel about the mobility in the city? How easy was it for you to move around? And what did you take away from Amsterdam in terms of the mobility of the city?
Yeah. So I did drive from Louisville to Boston for our residency and was fortunate enough to have a dedicated parking space. And for someone who is a smoker in Boston wintertime, it did in fact become my living room for a portion of that. But it also came in handy, when we wanted to go grocery shopping or, we put on a lot of events and we had to make runs. And oftentimes I was the one on deck to provide that, as well as dumping our compost trash, right? So there were some benefits of having a car, but I rarely drove it in Boston and became like a heavy pedestrian, which in Louisville's context, we are a car-centric city. Our public transportation pales in comparison. We're actually about to do embarking on a new strategic plan for the Transit Authority of River City, which is primarily buses. And they asked us to share what our greatest experience was with public transportation, and I said Amsterdam, right? Because even though I don't ride a bike, there was still so many options available, and the fact that the systems are integrated is even more radical, which is from the bike to the train to the subway, what have you. It seems like such a simple thing, but in the American context, we still haven't mastered, the ability to integrate opportunities and access to be more seamless. So, the fact that, you were saying you were riding a bike out into the countryside, I'm like, the idea, like that just would not be possible in Louisville. And if you did attempt it, you would be really risking your life because we've made considerable strides in our bike infrastructure, nowhere to the level of, say, a Cambridge, right? But the people here, particularly drivers, still cannot translate bike infrastructure. They're driving in the bike lanes still. And we have double buffered bike lanes with bike symbols in the middle, which you would think would register with people, but it doesn't. So there is a considerable amount of freedom of movement that I experienced in Amsterdam because of all the assorted, options for getting from point A.
And how did you like being a pedestrian in Cambridge, Gina?
Oh my gosh, like I basically walked my tail off, literally. Like, I mean, like walking a mile, like for McKeel and Andrea was no big deal, right? But walking a mile, to get to the pharmacy or wherever it was going was a huge adjustment. When friends came to visit, they could not keep up with me, and I couldn't keep up with McKeel and Andrea, right? So it was healthy, and I did miss it once I got back to Louisville. I got honked at a lot because in Cambridge, you pretty much drive 25, 30 miles an hour everywhere you go because the traffic is always so intense and you're trying to watch out for cyclists. In Louisville, you know, it's nothing to drive 45 on a residential street because we don't have a lot of pedestrians, right? So it's like I say, definitely different ends of the spectrum.
Yeah.
But I see the benefits and the necessity on both ends of that spectrum.
Yeah. Andrea, you were going to react to Sarah Peskin's question.
Yeah, well, and I think all these answers are good ones, but I think the key differentiation is what Gina was getting to, that we in North America, well, particularly, well, no, I'd say Mexico as well. We think of like, it's either driving or it's biking or it's walking or it's transit, right? The real key is this concept of connectivity and integration. So it's not whether it's a bike-friendly city or a car-friendly city or whatever, it's how well you as the person experiencing the city can choose to bike in the places and circumstances that it's appropriate for you, and then also use a car when it's, as Renee was pointing out, imperative, right? And I think Amsterdam's doing a much better job of both connectivity and integration. So those are the lessons I think we could learn. But I still think there were some issues around connectivity. Well, Renee pointed to one of them, but I think there's some other issues around connectivity. It does eventually fizzle out. Michiel and folks would sort of laugh at me because I'd head out in the morning on these trips that were like 2 or 3 hours away by public transportation. They're like, why would you want to do that? Like as a day trip. And I was like, look, in Canada, a 2 or 3 hour trip is like my journey to the university on public transit, right? Like where I work. So it's not like a long trip from my perspective. A long trip is the 15-hour drive to the next major city, right? Like that would be an investment. So it's figuring out how do you take these lessons from policy decisions that, there were ones made 50 years ago, Chris, I agree, but there were also ones made 800 years ago in Europe that we can't make those decisions here. We built cities at a different time for different kinds of mobility. So in North America, you have to sort of backgraft on the walkable city, which has never existed in large parts of North American cities, right? Whereas Amsterdam just needs to uncover a mobility structure that was always there and then add in these modern integrations and connectivities.
What I really enjoy about our public transportation system is that it creates these points of proximity where you are kind of forced, or you can enjoy other people's presence in a way, in a confined space, or whether it's the tram or the bus or the metro. But even when you're waiting in front of the traffic lights on your bike, it's packed with people. So you have to face each other. You have to negotiate space, which is, I think, is one of the most joyful moments of, being in Amsterdam. But this was just a way to connect it maybe also to the question of Charlotte around the segregation that is still also very present in Amsterdam. So like, if mobility or public transportation, cycling culture is a way to bring people together, at the same time, you also see this widening gap in many ways across the city. Amsterdam is maybe integrated when it comes to mobility, but when it comes to integration of social classes, it's clearly not an example of a city that has managed to do this successfully, I would say. So we do have we have social, racial segregation. We have whole neighborhoods where like the majority of people come from a certain part of the world. They rarely go to another part of the city. This is very much, I would say, the reality of Amsterdam as much as it is in London. So I'm not, I don't think I'm in a position to answer your question. That's what I wanted to say. Like Amsterdam, I think in that sense is not a good case study. I think it's only increasing, this segregation. Unless someone from Amsterdam thinks differently. Maybe Andrea can say something like, how are things in Vancouver, for example?
Yeah, also in the chat, I posed the question, is there a city that does that successfully, this concept of social integration? I think there was a point in time in Vancouver's history where it was better, for sure, like somewhere around the 90s, although interestingly, what also is characteristic of the 90s in Vancouver was it is the only time in the last 100 years that housing prices actually went down in the early 90s. So there was this brief period where, you wanted to rent a place and you'd go and look in the newspaper at the time and there'd be way more places than there was people looking for it. Now we have 300-400 people lining up for an apartment if it comes free because of the housing pressures, right? So I think the kind of dirty secret, you know, Vancouver has this origin story that it's all about forestry, that there were trees here and, you know, the colonists came and they cut down the trees and that's what this was all about. What never gets talked about is that right after the trees got cut down, the real estate developers came and were like, huh, land, let's sell it. And I think that Amsterdam has the same story, right? So you're these brilliant engineers who can, you know, save land from the sea and create new land. And then what happens to that land? You sell it, right? So that this story about capitalism and real estate isn't, we almost other ourselves from the reality of the economic system that has given us the wealth that has allowed us to have this beautiful skin and bones. And that's what's creating all this housing pressure and the lack of integration.
Coming back to the discussion about mobility, Chris, we have a question from Robin Chase. Do non-white Dutch people also ride bikes at the same rates?
Yeah, the statistics certainly suggest that, and anecdotally, we when we're traveling around the city, see a wide variety of colors and body sizes and ages and abilities using the cycle tracks. So yeah, I think it's.
That's not my experience.
Now, okay, it depends which part of the city you're in, but. I think it has been definitely a blind spot in terms of the policy because when you come to the Netherlands as an immigrant or a refugee, there's really no discussion about how you're going to move around the city. And so a lot of those people do get a driver's license by default, and they assume that the car is going to be the way that they move around. And there are volunteer groups, there are social enterprises that go into these neighborhoods and teach them the skills that they need to get on a bicycle because they are more than likely coming from a place that doesn't require riding a bike for their day-to-day activities. But there's still, those aren't government funded, they're not supported very well, they're relying on the kindness of volunteers. And so as a result, I think there's a lost opportunity there in terms of encouraging people. And so still, in certain places, it's seen as native Dutch people are the ones that cycle more than immigrants and refugees and other newcomers. But that's not to say that if they don't aren't given that opportunity to purchase and learn how to ride a bicycle, that you won't see them on the streets, and especially for women. That there's lots of groups that have. Shown up.
You're looking at me.
Yeah. Because
there are indeed lots of groups also from cities that have taken it upon themselves to offer biking lessons to women from immigrant communities. And what I've understood is that for many immigrant communities, biking is too low status. They want to drive a car. That has status. But that the women needing to pick up kids, do shopping, do all the slog of daily life are the ones who have really picked up on bicycles because it makes life so much easier for them and they're less worried about the status.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and that's so. There's as Chris said, there's lots of programs. There is a program run in Amsterdam by a woman known as Mama Agatha. That her entire mandate is to help women become comfortable cycling, teaching them in a way to empower them, because it does become a way to really be a part of the society that they've come to live in for whatever reason they have. I think we just need to be careful because oftentimes those of us of Caucasian background often refer to native Dutch as white people. And I think one of the things that's happening in a lot of cities throughout this country in particular is that concept of who that native Dutch person is changing, because we have 3 generation families here that come from, Suriname or Morocco or other places. So these are children that are growing up in this culture of cycling. We see them cycling with our kids to school every day. We see our colleagues or our peers on the streets also cycling around that don't look like us. And so they are there. As Chris pointed out, it does depend on what neighborhood you are in, because we do still have that, there is a lot of segregation in terms of where people live. But I think we just need to be careful about what we refer to as native Dutch now, because there are a lot of people that
right.
Yeah, don't look like me, speak a lot better Dutch than I do.
With regards to this issue of participation, be it through the bicycle or whatever many ways, there's a question for you, Michiel, from Washington, Fajardo, in the chat.
Yeah, I saw it, and how I interpret it is that how we discussed it is that we live in a welfare state, so we have this, maybe it's a myth or maybe it's rooted in a reality that there's a government who looks after you as long as you pay your taxes, right? There's this redistribution of wealth through a tax system which seems to pay off, for us at least, something to consider. But I think we've also reached the end of it in a way. I think we gave it a special twist. We coined this term of the polder model, which is kind of the quick version of it would be that you try to create consensus around difficult issues by bringing everyone, having endless discussions, and then you end up with some sort of, I don't know, solution that seems to work to at least most people that are involved in it.
What the polder model really is, Michiel, to my mind, is that you just talk the issue to death until everyone is so exhausted.
And the last one awake then makes the decision.
Okay, compromise.
True. But we've seen some examples here in Amsterdam, and Renee have been discussing this quite intensely over the past few weeks, that there's like spots or patches of nature, let's call them, like that around Amsterdam that are still undeveloped, that have a certain ecological value, but we have the Green Party who's now kind of in charge of the city, but still this land has been sold off and was about to be transformed into a large distribution center. So it was all done through this polder model by, including everyone, giving everyone the impression that there was this participatory democratic process. But at the end of the day, it's foreign investors, large corporations who have the final say over what happens in the city, as much as in any other city for that matter, I guess. But we are blinded by this belief that there's always this stable government who will solve things in the end. And I'm really wondering if this is the moment where we really should question that and maybe try to reimagine what our city government should look like. But maybe Renee, you want to step in here as well.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's a discussion that I already had with Andrea a while back also in Amsterdam. And it's interesting. We're also maybe blinded by the fact that we think like at a local level, we're very democratic. And I think that's something we can definitely discuss. I mean, for the first time ever, I think the Green Party was the biggest in Amsterdam. And I think a lot of people put a lot of hope in that, and rightly so, right? So there is the final bit of empty space between the city and the airport, that it has this open polar land, this historical landscape with like a small organic farm that people with like a certain distance to the labor market can then have some new experience in getting some work experience. So it's a really like beautiful and important part of the city. And if then the Green Party allows all of it to be erased for a distribution center of like a major supermarket chain, like what does local democracy then mean, right? If like the Green Party becomes the biggest, so it's the most, like many people in the city really want to make sure that the city develops in a way in which ecological concerns are a priority, that even at that stage, we don't manage to keep the distribution center out and keep the organic farm that is there. Like what does local politics then mean? And I think that a lot of people are disillusioned about that at this moment. And,
I read in the newspaper yesterday that if we were to have elections now, municipal elections, that the Green Party would have half the seats it has now.
Yeah. And that's a pity. And then what was this entire experience about then, right? Of the Green Party being the biggest. And and in the end, I think it's there is like some deeper structure. So also this, for example, the elder women that's working for the Green Party that was responsible for this was also saying, but these are about like contracts that were signed decades ago, and we can't. But then it means that like they're actually just continuing some, let's say some deep state that has other contracts, that is already ingrained in all kinds of systems that apparently cannot make new decisions, right? So, yeah, I think it's also a matter of rethinking how local democracy works. I think.
Maybe I can try to connect this to two other questions that were posted in the chat. One around equity, the other one about youth employment. I think what is interesting to point out that the word equity actually is not being discussed at all in the Dutch context. There's not even I would say there's not a Dutch equivalent for it. So there's equality, which is something we're aware of, but the term equity is something I actually learned at Harvard and through my conversation with Gina and Andrea. So the fact that you have to acknowledge the fact that not everyone has the same opportunities in life, not everyone has had the same trajectory to arrive at a certain point, and that instead of assuming that everyone has access to a democratic process, it means that, you know, we're all equal, that's a lie. I think it's something that is not really acknowledged and being discussed in the Dutch context. So when it comes, for example, to youth employment, also good to point out the Green Party is in charge of the city, but what we call the Liberals, funnily enough, which is the Conservative Party, is in charge of the country. And I think they kind of embrace this idea of like, as long as everything is done democratically and fairly, who is there to complain, right? You all can get a job if you work hard. So it's this typical neoliberal rhetorics that you can find anywhere is also, I think, very prevalent in the Dutch context. And I think it also has to do with the fact that there's no language around equity. There's no, let alone policy around it. But Renee, Tracy, those of you who know this country, how do you feel about that?
Tracy, what do you think?
Well,
equity, how would you translate that?
Yeah.
A level playing field, fair chances, equal chances, but I don't think it's a secret to anyone that where you're born and the circumstances under which and the social economic situation of your family is key to the chances you have later, and that certainly applies to the question from Charles McKinney, are youth finding employment? The people having the hardest time finding employment now, and then of course I'm ignoring the whole pandemic and what that has done to people who are studying and trying to create a profession for themselves, is that it is unbelievably difficult for young people of an immigrant background to find even an internship, let alone a job. If they apply with a Dutch name, they get hired. If they apply with an Islamic sounding name, they don't get hired. And this is really indicative of I think, a structural racism in Dutch society, which Dutch people don't acknowledge easily because it doesn't fit their self-image.
Yeah. Yeah, adding to that, what has also been discussed lately a lot, I think, is also how the educational system works in the Netherlands. That, like, at an age of 12, kids are being separated into like largely 3 or 4 categories of education, 4 levels. So that means that, like, like at a very young age, you're being already like pre-selected for some kind of university track or something completely different. And vocational training, yeah. But that means that that's, like, I think a lot of research shows that is way too early to already like pre-select kids at that age, and that has a lot of like resonates with a lot of inequalities that are within these demographics already.
And not only is that way too early, but it has been demonstrated beyond a shadow of a doubt that children from an immigrant background are much more often shunted off in the direction of a vocational training than towards the university, simply by dint of their ethnic background.
Yeah, and as part of this discussion over the last 1 or 2 years, I think there's so many examples of that have been given, right? Like people saying that their teachers were saying, well, I think the lowest level is best for you, and that their parents really had to fight to put them 1 level up or something. And so I think there's a lot of evidence that this is very problematic. And I think there's also a lot of people acknowledge now that this has to change. A bit too late, but hopefully that will happen.
Better late
One
than
thing that struck me in Amsterdam was how ethnically diverse your city government is, the elected representatives of it, not necessarily the staff. So I'm interested in that, like how that came to pass. My rough estimate, like just looking at it, it looked a lot more ethnically diverse than most large city governments in North America do.
Yeah, I think
Yeah,
they've
is that
been
the
trying
case?
to catch.
Yeah.
Yeah, she went to City Hall and there's this portrait wall, and you could like tell from the pictures that there was a diversity. But this is a relatively new phenomenon, I would say. Like this was introduced by the Green Party, who made a real effort, like a long-term effort actually, to entice people from all walks of life, different backgrounds to join the party, and they were trained also to fill in these positions. And I think they did a great job. But as Tracy was pointing out, the elections that are coming up are not necessarily the predictions are not very positive for the Green Party. So I think with their disappearance, you will see the same faces reappearing on that wall, I'm afraid. Right. So it's not systemic. It's really the effort of one political party, which is part of a large spectrum. We have this multi-party democracy. So I think even in our city government, there are probably 15 or 20 parties represented. So the Green Party is the biggest, but doesn't have the majority.
But let me add something to that, which I think is worth mentioning in this context. We just got a new government about 10 days ago, and the new Minister of Justice is for the Conservatives, which is worth noting, is a young woman of Turkish descent. And I think this is really new, and this is hopeful. Mm-hmm. I hope she does a good job.
Well, she'll have her work cut out for her because, of course, the expectations on her are going to be really different than if she was a white man. And also the support she'll get will be much lower because she just isn't going to come in with those traditional support networks, right?
Yeah.
But it does speak, so Michiel, remind me, the electoral system, you vote for the party, not the individual. So if the party is doing a good job around diversity, then you're voting, you can't mess that up. Like you can't move what am I trying to say? If the party decides the list is in a particular order, that's the list. So you vote for the party and then it takes whoever is on the top of the list and puts them into government. Yeah, okay.
What does happen occasionally, sorry, we can quickly add something. What happens occasionally was really interesting is that you, like people that are lower on the list, if they get like proportionally a lot of votes, they move up on that list when it comes to dividing the seats. So sometimes people that represent specific communities in specific parts of town that receive a lot of votes suddenly end up higher on the list and they actually get a seat. So it's an interesting opportunity for groups of people to push somebody into the city council actually.
Like a community organizer who might not have the profile in the party, but has the profile in specific communities.
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
Interesting. And so it sounds like a relatively recent experience of having this more diversity council, but I'm curious if there's, notwithstanding the distribution center, any impact or evidence, like are there efforts to be more inclusive of more diverse viewpoints in the way that resources are allocated or policies being decided?
For me, that is not very apparent, I have to say. Some things happened. I think what is interesting is also transformation of, I mean, maybe it sounds superficial, but I think it's on a symbolic level quite interesting that, for example, street names named after colonial figures are now being changed. And that's a process that has started. And that's maybe it's symbolic, but I think that's an important step. And that is really something that the last council undertook. So I think that is quite interesting.
And I know also that the mayor, who is supposed to be above the parties, but is herself actually a member of the Green Party, for example, has this informal group of women, immigrant women from the west of Amsterdam, which is now a heavily immigrant neighborhood. They just come to the mayor's home and talk about the issues that concern them and what the city can do to help. And I think it's what it actually leads to, I don't know. But the fact that this conversation is held at all, I think is wonderful.
Mm-hmm. By the way, our mayor is not elected. It's something that surprises people all the time, even myself. I think we're one of the few countries or cities in the world where the mayor is actually appointed by someone who's unknown to us. I don't know the process actually. So it's announced that there are two candidates and then someone picks the right candidate for us, for the city, for the citizens. And then this person is presented. And I think the city council has the right to vote it down, but I don't think there's anything else that could obstruct it. So it's like the person drops from the sky and this is what you have to deal with for, there's also not a term to, so that they can stay forever if they want. It's one of the weirdest things of our system. As a result of it, I think for 7.5 centuries, we've only had men, but luckily for unknown reasons, finally, we now have the first female mayor. So, but she wasn't elected. We're receiving some more questions here. I'm trying, they're rather long.
Yeah, I think addressing the issue of climate change, both in London and in Amsterdam. Our question came from, let me move up. Yes, from Michael Uwe Medimo. Yeah, the international connectivity, shouldn't we also be looking at climate change and the massive infrastructural interventions needed to keep Amsterdam out of the waves, and the cultural developments in London? What are the how profound might be the transformations in rich cities with sophisticated energy-intensive infrastructures? What will be required? Wow.
What is interesting about Amsterdam, so it portrays itself as this very progressive city that is kind of undergoing this rapid transformation from fossil fuels to renewable energy. At the same time, it's still the largest natural gas port in the world. It's one of the main polluters. It's the Shell R&D lab is based here in Amsterdam. Shell obviously has strong historical ties, not only to the city, but to the royal family of the country. So I think there's this sunny side of the story, which is all about it investing. Indeed, electric cars, you can recharge your car for nothing. It's all green energy. But at the same time, if you drive out of the city, there's like for kilometers, there's like fields of gas tanks and gas infrastructure connecting it also to the North Sea where some of the oil rigs are, etc. So I think you're quite easily fooled into believing that Amsterdam is this green city, or it's kind of showing us the way how to do it. But it actually still gets its revenues from, for example, the port, which is still very much rooted in this old industrial era. So I think only if
retail is really way down at the bottom of the European ranking for renewable energy. I think we're the 4th place from the bottom. It's really bad.
But I do think it's an opportunity indeed. So if we kind of shift the attention away from people putting solar panels on their roofs, which is, I think, a good thing, and it should be promoted and supported by the government, but to also look at, like, start killing some of these darlings that generate the tax revenue that we all need to invest in this beautiful city. I think only then you can have a profound impact on the world. If you start reconsidering the role of the Port of Amsterdam, for example. But I think this is a discussion that is, for example, not on the agenda of the upcoming elections. This is kind of beyond anyone's scope, and it's also not something that will get votes for you.
Yeah, I also find it interesting how this is an issue that people also seem to ignore, or like try to ignore. I mean, in the end, like I think, like if worst case scenarios of the climate crisis are becoming a reality, I think we're really looking at a situation that none of us will still witness, but that the existence of Amsterdam will actually be threatened also on the long term. And it's interesting how that is something that hasn't been made so clear yet, even though I think that's definitely on the table. Maybe not within 50 years, but maybe on a longer scenario, a longer time frame actually. Yeah, so the urgency is also definitely there.
Yeah, there are entire neighborhoods where people are living 5, 6, or 20 feet below sea level.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So, and even if you would go there, you don't see people panicking. You don't see them taking the precautions that you might expect. So people just mind their own business, live their lives, and expecting that the state or the government, the city government, will kind of solve it for them. But I think, yeah, we've reached a crucial point now where we should start rethinking some of these certainties.
Yeah, I mean, what was interesting is that not far from Amsterdam, they were planning a new neighborhood, in one of these boulders that are indeed like really deep, so at 20 feet deep or something. And for the first time, actually, people were saying maybe we shouldn't build this new neighborhood in this piece of land that we probably can't keep dry on the long term. So that was actually the first time that that kind of decision was, or the first time I heard about it, that it was actually so clearly already like deciding how land was being allocated and being used.
Mm. So the clock is ticking. We only have 9 more minutes left. Andrea has some reflections.
For Virginia, though, Michiel, now I'm kind of confused. Was this also to be the rest of our time is social time, or is this time for the panel? Can we have a verdict from the organization? Do we have any social time other than this? Or is our time for the panel? Well, 8 minutes is too little for social time, so I'd say
let's try to combine it. Yeah.
I think, do you mind if I jump in?
Yeah, no, go ahead.
Do.
To Michael's question, I mean, I was laughing a bit. Michiel did tour me around the natural gas tanks and a variety of energy places, because I have a particular, I do a lot of work here in Canada on renewable energy and climate policy. So he's not kidding about the extent of it. I think what really stuck with me, and something Michiel, Gina, and I spent a lot of time talking about in Cambridge, is this concept of exceptionalism, right? So Amsterdam is the world, well, no, that's not true. Global North leader, they've been holding back the sea for 800 years, right? So they're very good at this, and they have a confidence, a deserved confidence around it. So you see them at the one hand putting in these incredible innovative interventions against further sea level rise while building out into the sea at the same time, which is a weird juxtaposition, like to Renee's point, that they're just starting to be like, maybe this isn't such a great idea, right, given projections. But it does sort of speak to the story we tell ourselves, right? If we're not paying it, like if we're like, nope, there's no inequities here, or nope, this isn't happening here, it becomes impossible to find solutions to it. And I know Michiel and I both experienced when we were in America that there's a lot of stories Americans tell themselves that are not accurate, at least from an outsider's perspective, about what's actually going on there. But it did, when I came back to Canada, it made me really question, like, what are we telling ourselves that isn't true, or not telling ourselves that we should be confronting? And I think ultimately all of this climate policy, like there's, you know, a menu of solutions that we can learn from that are happening around the world. But ultimately we have to stop kidding ourselves about what's really going on, and our hubris around what we can actually do in regards to that and in response to that.
Mm-hmm. What would you say is one of the myths that we kind of cherish about ourselves as a city?
As Amsterdam? Oh boy, that's a tough question. I think like the one that I think would be most dangerous in terms of not being able to respond to policy is this inequities thing. Like this idea that the policies you're creating are lifting everyone up equally or at all, right? I think that it could be quite, well, it already is having a lot of impacts on people.
And Gina, what do you think? I mean, you had quite a sunny interpretation of the city, but was there something you noticed that might interfere with this version of the city?
Well, I think to learn that there literally is no word for equity is telling. I would agree with that. But, I remember when we over dinner, we had talked about, I guess, the work I've done on discussing redlining policy. And I was intrigued that most of the guests at the dinner party didn't have a concept of that. But in conversations I had with women of color after that, they absolutely were having sort of like firsthand experiences with these nuances, right? And so I'm a bit, I guess, shocked that I drank so much of the Kool-Aid. I mean, it was just like it was smooth. It was a smooth city. Like I felt welcome. I didn't feel othered at all. But then I have to remind myself that I was there, with with you all, with Loeb fellows, as opposed to living or staying out in some of the suburban areas that are more segregated. And I'm an American, and so that's different than walking the life of of being Dutch, regardless, but particularly with regard to my ethnic background, or just when I went to the Tropen Museum and saw the new approach that was being taken with curation to tell a different story. It was just fascinating to me. Everything from Mecca was on. There was an exhibit on Mecca, like introducing Dutch people to what it means to be Muslim, or and I was like, oh wow, like on the one hand, Amsterdam seems so far ahead, so creative and eccentric in a way that that Andrea, I think, really nailed. But at the other time, it's sort of clueless, right? Like not only have the spaces or places maybe been cleansed, but like I would almost say that I guess if the average sort of ordinary Dutch person still has no concept of something like redlining, or systematic discrimination, or I never heard anyone talk about racism. I don't know if it's classism or what it is, but there's definitely some ism that's playing out with regard to what the observations are. So I would say the danger is just the lack of awareness, right? In a global context, people are protest. I mean, you're talking about Black Pete, right? I remember when I found out about Black Pete, I was floored, right? And so you're talking about it, but I'm not sure you're really investigating the origins and where that's coming from. And certainly that is my hope, for generations to come to have a greater understanding.
Yeah. I think if in answer, my response to Michiel's question would be that the Dutch still have a rosy image of themselves as tolerant, and that it has increasingly become clear in certainly the last 10 years with the Kick Out Black Pete movement, that is not as much the case as people would like to think. You're right, Gina.
I think when you translate this to Amsterdam, there's a certain innocence or naivety around these issues, also because we don't think of ourselves as a big metropolis where these problems exist, right? We're this village, this lovely place where people come to relax and to live the good life. So it's not of our concern. So I think there's this, I don't know, paralysis in a way. We're not capable of just, activating ourselves to, catch up with some of these discussions, to really reflect on it and and make change happen. So yeah, a long way to go in that respect. And that's why we need people like you to come and visit us and to hold up the mirror and to, speak truth to what is happening here. Maybe we...
So we hand it off to Virginia now to start up our social time.
Yeah, sounds good to me.
Last words from anyone on our panel? Oh, here you are, Virginia. Hello.
I'm apparently getting the last word. I want to thank you so much, Tracy and Michiel and the panel, for a really expansive conversation. And as someone who's visited Amsterdam and seen maybe the rosy glow, opened up a lot of acreage in my mind. And that's one of the things I often get when I talk to Loebs. I hope you all have enjoyed it too. We put on a lot of miles today, and I want to thank you so much for being a part of it. The trip continues now with an opportunity to chat. You can go over to the networking hubs and talk with a smaller group. You're going to have half an hour, so you can do a virtual Loeb pub crawl. You can kind of pop in and out of rooms and mingle. Tomorrow, we visit Rio de Janeiro with Washington Fajardo and Mexico City with Soraya Segu. So please do encourage your fellow classmates to join us. We're going to be beginning at 11 a.m. Eastern tomorrow. And big thanks so much to Verve for managing the technical side of things. And of course, to the 2022 study tour organizing committee, Marcella Costa, Kathy Berry, Helen Marriage, Selena Ocean, Robert Stein, and the inimitable Sally Young. So again, hang around for some conversation at the sessions at the networking tab, and we're going to be rolling until 3:25. Again, thanks for joining us, and bye-bye.